have a manager who is draining your confidence, your energy, and your enthusiasm to show up for work? Are you thinking that you may have a toxic boss? Well, there are specific signs or red flags that are the giveaway. Right up front, I want to stress that there's a big difference between a toxic boss and one who's just difficult or incompetent. Maybe they're disorganized or a bad communicator. That doesn't mean that they are toxic. So I've pulled together 20 signs that collectively point to a toxic boss. To help me out, I've enlisted this channel's workplace psychology expert, Laura, to give the research around each sign. I've organised the 20 signs into 5 categories of 4. Here's the list that we'll work through. You can tick off each sign that you recognise and then count them up at the end. I've got a PDF version that you can download. There's a link in the description below. The first category is what I call criticism and belittlement. The actions in this category are really how toxic bosses systematically chip away at an employee's confidence and completely halt their career progression. And the first sign is often an act of omission, not commission. It's the omission of praise. These managers fail to give due praise or recognition for good work. This is a complete contradiction of healthy leadership. Good management emphasizes valuing followers, affirming their contributions, and building trust that people's hard work is valued. Look, this is management 101. When I was a first-time manager, I was sent on courses, and praising the team and calling out individuals was always emphasized. Any decent book on leadership will say the same. A toxic boss simply does not do that. Laura, what are the consequences here?
When a manager constantly withholds positive reinforcement, the consequence isn't neutral. It actively contributes to emotional exhaustion and low job dedication.
So, when a leader refuses to acknowledge good work, what's happening from this perspective?
Research in 2008 linked abusive supervision to low job dedication and emotional exhaustion. So if you're feeling this, you're not just having a bad day.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's hit sign 2, which is a failure to listen to feedback, suggestions, or concerns. This is in contrast to healthy leadership, which requires two-way communication and influence. To give an example from the tech world, let's say you go to your team lead and talk them through your concerns that a particular feature was rushed. And now the team is building on top of that feature without doing some improvements first. Technical debt, right? That's the kind of thing the lead should listen to, especially if you're the one in the weeds. But all you get is a shrug and a brush off. You're told to hit the next delivery, and it's not after a back and forth discussion with careful arguments. You feel like you haven't been listened to at all. What's going on there?
This is highly characteristic of narcissistic leadership. Narcissistic leaders view themselves as inherently superior, the center of gravity, extraordinary. They see their subordinates as extensions of themselves or at best minor contributors. So they react really badly, often aggressively, when they're contradicted or presented with information that challenges their worldview. The refusal to listen reinforces the leader's authority. It's also a hallmark of authoritarian leadership styles where the leader's ideas are the only ones that matter. It just reinforces that power imbalance.
Narcissistic leadership and authoritarian style. We should look into those in other videos. For now, I'll go to sign 3. This is where the toxic boss is constantly criticizing you without constructive feedback. Criticism from a good manager is expressed in a way that helps you grow. First, they point out the problem area in a calm way that's not personalized. But crucially, they engage you in a two-way conversation about how to fix something. Just straight up saying that your code is bad, your documentation is poor, your communication isn't up to standard, that's not constructive feedback.
Blake Tepper has done a lot of research into abusive supervision. He describes hostile verbal behaviors like ridiculing of subordinates and constantly reminding them of past mistakes or failures. The goal isn't to help, the focus is on the hostile verbal delivery. It's criticism used as a weapon, not as a tool for mentorship.
For now, I'll move on to the 4th sign in this category, and that does involve feedback, but it's giving negative feedback publicly instead of privately. Let's say you're in a daily stand-up with your team members, and the lead berates you in front of everyone for what he or she perceives to be an issue with your code. Now, they may be right, but that's not the point. This could be a teachable moment for you and your team, where the most senior engineer shows some alternative code and how it's faster, easier to understand, easier to maintain. Done the right way, that's how we all learn from each other. If it's a small change, then straight up discussing it in the group is probably fine. But let's say your lead wants to rip out a big chunk of your work. And again, let's assume that they are right. If the first time you're hearing this is that they go to your code line by line in the team meeting, disparaging it, saying this is rubbish, a junior would do better, then that is terrible management. This lead should have had a one-to-one conversation with you, a little intro saying there's something we need to address here, and talking to the code in a collaborative way. Once you've agreed on the changes, I'd advise the lead to let you be the one to explain your changes to your teammates. But let's say you're learning the new code base or even a language, so that might be a bit much. In that case, the lead can take the team to it by saying, look, this is how most people would do this task first time round. I happen to have more experience. This is how I recommend we do it instead. Get the difference? You're not being called out for bad work. It's like you've given the lead the opportunity to show good practice. You've done them a favour. But what does the toxic boss do? They enjoy the opportunity to berate and belittle people in front of others. Yeah, it's a power trip. But Laura, what's the impact on the team member?
To understand the severity of this, we need to talk about social identity theory. When a manager publicly humiliates a team member, it attacks that person's standing within the work group, their social identity. The leader is essentially declaring to the entire team, your status in this group is low, and everyone here needs to acknowledge your diminished value. The public nature of the act is the toxic ingredient, and the consequence is severe. When people feel undervalued, they are less likely to go the extra mile for the project. I mean, why would you invest extra effort when your social standing is being publicly demolished by the person in charge? Research has shown that the employee retreats into a self-protective shell.
Yeah, don't put your head above the parapet because it will get lopped off. Well, that was the first category with 4 signs. I'm going to move on to the second category now, one I call manipulation and micromanagement. So here we shift focus. If the first group was like a hammer chipping away at confidence, this next group is more like subtle psychological warfare. Sign 5 is micromanagement. This manager is micromanaging everything and insisting on improving everything you do. You have to run everything by them, and often you'll find they've simply taken the task and done it themselves, leaving you wondering, what the heck are you supposed to do? This manager is obsessively detail-oriented. They manage tasks closely, and consequently, they just refuse to delegate any meaningful authority. Look, I'd say here that this may not be toxic behaviour, particularly if it's someone at the early stage of their management career. Not knowing how to delegate is a classic mistake for first-time team leads and managers. It's inexperience. You have to learn to delegate, so you may need to cut a new team lead some slack here. However, a crucial part of team management is giving team members the space and opportunities to grow. If you have an experienced manager and they are still micromanaging everything you do, then this is getting into toxic behaviour. So Laura, from a psychological point of view, why do some managers persist with micromanagement?
This behavior really stems from a profound lack of trust in their subordinates. They just don't believe anyone else can do it right. They'd rather do it themselves or at least approve every little step because they don't trust employees to make decisions that align with the leader's own narrow, self-serving objectives. The long-term impact on the team member is just stagnation. I mean, if I have no autonomy, I have no ability to learn new skills or execute creative problem solving, it's paralyzing.
Yeah, I'd also say that it's bad for the organization too. It creates massive organizational waste because the leader becomes the bottleneck for every single minor decision. Now, consider sign 6, moving goalposts. Toxic leaders move goalposts by changing expectations with unclear communication. You've got that classic feeling of doing great work only to find the goal shifted right as you cross the finish line. Bit of mixed metaphors there, but you know what I mean. Now, the manager may have received a change in requirements from the stakeholders halfway through the project. That feature A needs to be feature B. A good manager talks to the team, and you all likely have a collective rolling of eyes about those pesky users, right? A toxic manager rocks up at the final show and tell and says, nah, that's not what they want. Why did you do X when they want Y? This is a waste of time, you need to fix this fast. And you're wondering, when was Y mentioned? Again, good managers make mistakes. Under pressure, they may have forgotten this once to inform the team of change requirements. But if this is happening over and over again, is that toxic?
We can say that this manager is profoundly unpredictable. Their reactions, their priorities, their decision criteria are all inconsistent and random, and this unpredictability is a massive source of stress. It's actually far greater than having a demanding but predictable boss. And unpredictability is a powerful source of toxicity because the human brain craves security and predictability. When the criteria for success shift on a daily basis, it raises anxiety levels and generates feelings of deep insecurity and mistrust in the team. The employees start seeking constant reassurance and approval from the leader, which of course just reinforces the leader's control.
Sign 7 is the withholding of important information about projects or expectations. You may be thinking, that's the same as my previous example about the change in requirements. But this is more about knowledge hoarding. Nobody else in the team has the full picture of the project, so everybody has to go to the manager to benefit from the tool or feature. It's another power play to maintain their importance within the organization.
Yes, it's a manipulative tactic designed to reinforce the power imbalance. By controlling the flow of essential information, especially the knowledge you need to do your job effectively, the toxic leader forces team members into a state of dependence.
Finally, in this group, we have one of the most talked about red flags in Sign 8, which is gaslighting. Let's go back to the previous example of the manager calling out to change requirements at the last minute and asking you, why did you do feature A instead of B? And you say, but you never mentioned this change. A good manager slaps their forehead and apologizes and says, yeah, my mistake, and now we're in a jam. Let's pull together, fix this, and I'll make it up to the team. Donuts are on me. The toxic manager insists that they told you the new requirement months ago, will even give a date. If you mention that you both discussed feature A week ago, they'll plain deny it. What's the research on that?
While gaslighting is the popular term, the academic research frames it as a form of supervisory abuse. So abusive supervisors break promises and they engage in hostile verbal behaviors that just deny shared reality. Some researchers say that this leads team members into a state of paranoia.
Paranoia? That's just as intense a word as gaslighting. How does a manager's behavior go from just being dishonest to actually inducing paranoia?
Well, when a supervisor systematically denies reality, contradicts established facts, or deletes evidence of previous conversations, the team member begins to doubt their own memory, their judgment, their sanity. The goal of this constant denial isn't just to be dishonest, it is specifically to make someone question their own reality. This locks them into a state of constant self-doubt and defensive suspicion. That's the real psychological harm. It leaves people vulnerable and isolated.
The next category I call exploitation and intimidation. These signs highlight the manager's extreme self-interest. For them, the team just exists to serve their sense of self-importance, and more practically, their career advancement. Let's look at the ninth sign. This is where the manager takes credit for your ideas and your accomplishments. Let's say you came up with an innovative solution to a problem that top management were complaining about. That's the kind of thing that jumps you up to senior or staff engineer, right? But then you open a company-wide email from top management thanking your boss for the solution, mention of you or the team. Laura, what's the research say about that?
This is considered self-promotional leadership. This leader seeks to stand out and will aggressively take credit for achievements that absolutely do not belong to them. It is also strongly linked to narcissistic leaders who are fundamentally self-absorbed and seek constant external praise to feed their fragile egos. This violates the implicit social contract of the workplace. If you deliver results, you expect recognition in return, or at least credit. And it also leads to bigger problems for the organization. When leaders steal the ideas and deserved recognition of their subordinates, it justifies retaliation or deviancy on the part of the subordinate.
Deviancy? Whoa, hold on with that talk.
Yeah, I know, it's academic talk. It really means that the employee feels justified in fighting back, which sets up a cycle of negative reciprocity, tit for tat. That cycle is so destructive.
Sign 10 is when the toxic boss blames others when things go wrong and does not take accountability. So they're around to take credit for the successful release, but when the proverbial hits the fan, let's say that new feature has crashed the sales system. Well, if you're lucky, they're busy deflecting blame to the testers. If you're unlucky, you're the sacrificial lamb. What's going on there, Laura?
Well, sometimes the toxic leader actually does apologize to their supervisors, but that apology is squarely framed as the failure of you and the team. They do not take responsibility themselves. Again, this is a key characteristic of self-promotional leadership. This behavior protects the leader's ego at the expense of the team's morale. They're far more interested in their own career advancement than in supporting their team. Shifting blame is the easiest way to keep the reputation clean.
Let's move on to sign 11, where there is no respect of your boundaries. This is the invasion of your personal time. It's even more a problem now we have work apps installed on our personal phones. Back in the day, when I was a junior developer, you either had a big heavy work phone and you were on call, or you could not be contacted. The good old days. What are you seeing in companies, Laura?
I'm seeing incidences of toxic managers demanding immediate responses on evenings, weekends, during vacation. It's a direct assault on work-life balance. Academically, this behavior is a known massive contributor to stress, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and burnout within team members. And sometimes this erosion of boundaries will escalate into just overt fear management, like threatening someone's job.
Whoa, okay, hold it. Threatening jobs? That's as bad as it gets. That brings us to sign 12, which involves threatening your job or your reputation to maintain control. Intimidation, right?
Oh, yes, it's absolutely intimidation. It's what the U.S. Army defines as a key component of toxic leadership. They say toxic leaders are those who consistently use dysfunctional behaviors to deceive, intimidate, coerce, or unfairly punish others in order to get what they want from them. It's the creation of a fear-based environment.
Okay, but my professional background is tech, not the army. And in large companies with a reasonable HR department, thankfully, it's not so easy for a manager to kick a team member out the door on a whim. But reputation is another matter. That can be attacked through poor appraisals, PIPs, and generally negative reviews going upward. Now, a manager may be justifiably utilizing these tools with a really poor employee. That happens. The problem is if it's not justified. For the next category, we're moving up the corporate level to look at how the toxic leader actively shapes the organizations. This category I call toxic culture and favoritism. The signs here turn the workplace into a hostile and demoralizing culture that hurts everyone, even those who aren't the primary target. Let's start with sign 13, which is the lack of empathy for employees' challenges. I'm thinking of those occasional factors outside of work that a good manager will accommodate: a sick spouse or child, a bereavement, the boiler breaks, or your moving house. But the toxic boss makes no allowances. What does the research say on that?
A lack of empathy is very associated with narcissistic leadership. Narcissistic leaders lack the capacity for genuine empathy because they are just fundamentally self-absorbed. They prioritize their own needs and feelings above all others. They ignore or dismiss other people's challenges.
Sign 14 is that toxic bosses play favorites with certain team members, but not with you. They give preferential treatment to those who can give them an advantage, boost their own career, or, just serve their ego. You may be side eyeing that colleague who seems to do nothing but parrot everything the manager says when he or she isn't present in meetings. They don't contribute anything else, but they seem to get away with not pulling their weight. What does the research say about that then?
We know that favoritism can cause a team to split. The in-group receives better treatment, more resources, more trust, and more opportunities, while the out-group is marginalized and deprived. So it turns the team against itself.
Divide and conquer?
You said it, not me. But yes, it's in the manager's perceived interest to keep team members at each other's throats instead of them collaborating to expose the manager's faults.
Sign 15 is a manager who likes to gossip about colleagues and badmouths their own team members. Of course, this is incredibly unprofessional.
Margaret, it's more than that. It's a direct assault on organizational trust and confidentiality. It signals to the entire organization that confidentiality is non-existent and that hostile behavior, even backstabbing, is an acceptable, normalized way to interact. It sets the tone for a hostile climate. Gossiping is a low-cost, high-impact way for the leader to promote and reinforce that hostility without leaving any formal records.
Sign 16 is that they isolate you from specific meetings or calls. On a practical level, this means you don't have the information needed to do your job well. That ties into the earlier signs of gaslighting. But this is still different. What does the research tell us about isolation?
This is a highly strategic act of psychological abandonment. We've already talked about public criticism attacking people's sense of belonging within a team. This is another angle of attack. Your identity is tied to your group membership at work. The isolation attacks that identity. That leads to reduced organizational identification and an increase in intentions to quit. So with this one, people start looking for the exit.
The final category of signs moves beyond behaviors and gets into core personality and ego. We call it ego and character flaws. Sign 17 is a manager who acts very differently around their own supervisors. They shift their demeanor, their attitudes, and their language when the top management are around. They turn on the charm and really talk up their own accomplishments. Those accomplishments may have been mostly due to you or other team members, but that isn't mentioned. What's going on there?
This is a definitive telltale behavior of self-promotional leadership. These leaders are often striving to be well-liked by those higher up, establishing relationships with the highest decision-making levels, often at the expense of their direct reports. This provides the crucial insight, doesn't it? They can control themselves and how they treat people. The abuse directed downward is a deliberate choice. It's not simply a failure of self-control. They're calculating their actions based on who is watching them.
That is seriously depressing. Next is sign 18, where the manager is all about themselves. Good leadership considers the organisation, the vision, and the employee's well-being all equally. But toxic leaders are primarily motivated by self-interest.
This is the very core of the pathology. This self-interest is what justifies all the manipulative behaviors we've discussed. Their primary purpose is to maintain and extend their power and protect their ego, even if it requires degrading others.
Sign 19 is that toxic leaders are massively overconfident about their knowledge and abilities. What's that about?
This is strongly related to narcissistic leadership. These leaders see themselves as extraordinary and they believe they have the right to make all the decisions unilaterally. It's delusional. It also results in leaders blinded by their own self-importance who refuse to delegate or listen to necessary expertise. When their view is that I am the smartest person in the room, then any information contradicting that, especially from a subordinate, must be ignored or suppressed. This calls back to sign 2 in that they don't listen.
Final sign is a strong sense of denial about their shortcomings. The rest of us have moments of self-doubt. We question our own judgment about that design decision, that particular choice of tool or implementation. It's very easy to envy those who don't feel uncertain, ever.
This is another part of narcissism. Narcissistic leaders won't admit their mistakes and they reject negative feedback. The leader must maintain the facade of perfection even if reality is screaming otherwise. The denial means they are completely uncoachable. They can't improve because they refuse to acknowledge that a problem exists with their actions, and that lack of accountability just reinforces the entire toxic cycle. It makes behavior chronic and severe for the employees trapped beneath them because there is zero chance for self-correction from the leader's side.
So those are the 20 signs of toxic bosses. You may have worked your way through the checklist and you're counting up the crosses, or ticks if you prefer. And let's say you've got quite a lot, and it's clear as day now that you're in a toxic manager situation. So what do you actually do? How can you mitigate what's going on? Can you mitigate what's going on? The career coach in this channel, Kyle, has some good advice here, and we're working on a series of videos on the topic. Write a comment below if you're interested and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out.